Headlights pierced through the dark rain, illuminating the deserted road leading to the wooden house on the outskirts of Green Mountain, Vermont. Dr. Sarah Mitchell slowed down when she spotted a small movement by the roadside, a creature stumbling through the storm. Without hesitation, she hit the brakes. Her Subaru Outback skidded slightly on the wet road. It was just a split-second decision, stopping in the middle of a rainy night to rescue a creature she thought was an abandoned kitten. Sarah couldn't have known that this action would completely upend the new life she was trying to build after a painful divorce. 40 years old with her own veterinary clinic in a wooden cabin in the forest, Sarah had chosen rural Vermont to reinvent herself, seeking the peace that Boston couldn't provide after 12 years of failed marriage. 6 months here had begun to heal the invisible wounds. But it was a small, wet creature she found tonight that would bring the unexpected magic she never anticipated. Sarah rushed out of the car, rain slapping against her face as she swept her flashlight along the roadside. Bright eyes reflected the light from a low bush. A small creature soaked through, huddled in the cold rain. She knelt down, whispering reassurances. The creature didn't run away, perhaps too weak or too frightened to move. After a few minutes of patience, Sarah gently wrapped it in a blanket from her car and brought it inside. Under the light, she examined the creature. No collar, no microchip, an abandoned kitten, or so she thought. The brownish-gray fur with small spots was soaking wet, and she could feel the ribs beneath the skin. Sarah decided to take it home to warm it up and feed it, planning to post a found notice the next day. Or perhaps if no one claimed it, this might be a sign that it was time for her to adopt a companion. 2 weeks passed, and the kitten Sarah had rescued had completely transformed. Her social media posts yielded no results. No one in the area recognized this small creature. Sarah wasn't surprised. Her clinic served a large area, and many families lived in isolation, scattered across hills and in remote valleys. She named it Whisper for its soft, almost inaudible cry when she found it. Lately, however, Sarah wasn't sure if the name still fit. As it recovered its health and confidence, Whisper was increasingly unlike a normal kitten. This morning, Sarah observed Whisper from the kitchen table, where she was sipping her coffee. In just 2 weeks, the small creature had gained considerable weight. What was once a skinny frame had now become firm and muscular, and the spots on its coat, initially faint and hard to discern, had now developed into a distinctive pattern unlike any cat breed Sarah had ever seen. But those weren't the only changes. Whisper's ears seemed longer, more pointed, and its tail was much shorter than those of domestic cats. Its eyes, instead of becoming the round marbles of a kitten, maintained their wild, sharp shape. Sarah sat down her coffee cup as Whisper began to play with a new toy, a stuffed mouse she had bought from the pet store. She had witnessed many cats play with toys, but the way Whisper attacked, hid, and pounced on its prey was different. It wasn't just a game. There was a precision, an intensity that Sarah had never seen in a kitten. The night before, Sarah had been awakened by a strange sound. When she entered the kitchen, she had caught Whisper standing over the body of a mouse, a real one. Her old wooden house occasionally had unwelcome visitors. But what shocked Sarah was how Whisper had killed a mouse. It wasn't the clumsy play of a kitten. It was a precise bite to the neck, the kill of a born hunter. Sarah returned to the present when she heard a knock at the door. She smiled when she saw Mike Reynolds, a friend from her college days, and a wildlife biologist at the Vermont Wildlife Department. Mike had a somewhat untidy salt and pepper beard and a ready smile, and he'd been one of the first to welcome Sarah when she moved in. Mike had come to invite Sarah to a talk about wildlife at the local library, but the conversation quickly turned to Whisper when the small creature curiously approached the visitor. Sarah watched as Mike, knelt down, hand extended. Whisper approached, sniffed, then stood still as Mike carefully examined it. The smile disappeared from Mike's face, replaced by an expression Sarah couldn't read. He slowly stood up, eyes not leaving Whisper. "Sarah," Mike said, his voice deeper than usual. "This is not a kitten." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "What do you mean? What is it?" "This is a Bobcat kitten, Lynx Rufus, and a fairly young one." Sarah looked down at Whisper, then back at Mike. "Sure," he was joking, but his face was completely serious. Over the next hour, Mike explained the signs. The characteristic short tail, the spots on the fur, the The bone structure, the significantly longer hind legs, and especially the ears with the black tufts at the tips, which were now becoming more apparent, all pointed to an undeniable conclusion. Whisper was not a domestic cat. It was a wild predator, a species that in Vermont was strictly protected. Mike patiently explained the laws regarding ownership of wildlife, the legal responsibilities, and the risks. An adult bobcat could weigh 10 times as much as a domestic cat with hunting instincts that could not be tamed. For Sarah's benefit, and that of Whisper, no, Mike emphasized, it needed to be called by its proper name. The bobcat kitten needed to be handed over to experts who could care for it and eventually reintegrate it into the wild. When Mike left, promising to contact his colleagues at the Vermont Wildlife Conservation Center, Sarah found herself standing alone in the living room with a young wild predator sleeping on her sofa. Reasons told her to call the conservation center immediately. But looking at the small creature sleeping peacefully, Sarah felt a connection she couldn't explain. She had saved its life. It trusted her. And whatever it was, cat or bobcat, Whisper had become a part of her new life. Just a few more days, Sarah promised herself just to learn more, to prepare, then she would do the right thing. She had renamed it Wilder. The name Whisper seemed too soft, too domesticated for a creature that Sarah now understood was a pinnacle of wild evolution. A small, but perfect hunter growing larger each day. A week had passed since Mike Reynolds confirmed her suspicions. A week in which Sarah had spent most of her time reading everything she could about bobcats. She had converted her attic into a dedicated space for Wilder with a small climbing tree, mentally stimulating items, and a pad that she could easily replace. She bought raw meat from the local butcher, researching the appropriate diet for a growing bobcat. And in the process, she had forgotten her initial plan to hand Wilder over to the authorities, or perhaps not forgotten, but deliberately delayed, because with each passing day, the bond between her and this wild creature grew stronger. Wilder now followed Sarah around the house like a shadow. At night it curled up at the foot of her bed, its soft purring like a lullaby that lulled Sarah to sleep, a deeper and more peaceful sleep than she had had in the months after her divorce. In the morning, Wilder greeted her with a soft, raspy call, almost like a cat's meow, but deeper. Wilder. Guidebooks warned that bobcats couldn't truly be domesticated, but Wilder seemed to be an exception, perhaps because it was so young when Sarah found it, or perhaps because it recognized that Sarah had saved its life. Whatever the reason, it had formed an attachment to Sarah that even Mike, when he visited, had to admit was remarkable. Of course, there were challenges. Wilder's hunting instincts could not be suppressed. It had killed all the mice in and around the house, and Sarah had had to make a more secure enclosure for her chickens. It had also damaged some furniture, clawing at fabric and rugs with its increasingly sharp claws. And then there was the incident with Mrs. Martha Stevens, the neighbor who lived about half a mile away. One afternoon, Mrs. Stevens appeared at Sarah's door, her face red with anger, holding a dead chicken in her hands. A chicken with neck wounds suspiciously similar to a bobcat's hunting technique. Sarah had had to apologize profusely, pay for the chicken, and even help Mrs. Stevens build a more secure chicken coop. But the incident reminded Sarah of what Mike had said. Wilder was growing up, and its wild instincts would only become stronger. Speaking of Mike, he had called twice to ask about Sarah's transfer plan. Both times she had found ways to avoid a direct answer. The rational part of her knew that Mike was right, that Wilder belonged in the wild with its own kind, but her heart didn't want to let go to her. Everything changed on a rainy night, reminiscent of the night when Sarah found Wilder. She was working on some files in the living room when Wilder suddenly stiffened, staring at the window. Sarah followed its gaze, but saw only darkness and then a movement, a shadow gliding across the yard. Sarah turned off the living room lights and stood by the window, careful not to do anything that would attract attention. The rain made visibility difficult, but when a flash of lightning lit up the sky, she saw it clearly, an adult bobcat standing at the edge of the yard, its eyes reflecting light like two emeralds. Sarah's heart pounded. The bobcat was 3 times the size of Wilder with identical features, just larger, stronger, and clearly wilder. When the second flash of lightning illuminated the yard, the bobcat was gone. But Wilder remained frozen, ears erect, its entire body tense, eyes fixed on the spot where the large bobcat had stood. And then, a sound Sarah had never heard from Wilder, a raspy call, almost like a summons. Sarah looked at the small creature in her living room, and the truth hit her like a punch. It could be Wilder's mother. The adult bobcat might have been searching for its long-lost offspring. Unable to sleep, Sarah spent the night tossing and turning. Tomorrow she decided she would call Mike. It was time to tell the truth. It was time to do the right thing. The next morning, Mike arrived with 2 colleagues from the Wildlife Conservation Center. They confirmed what Sarah had seen: the footprints of an adult bobcat in the yard and signs that it had returned multiple times. "We can set up cameras," Lauren, one of the experts, suggested, "to confirm whether it's the mother of the bobcat kitten. If it is, we can try to reunite them." Sarah nodded, trying to swallow the lump in her throat. She looked at Wilder napping in a ray of sunshine coming through the window and knew that her time with it was coming to an end. The infrared cameras installed around Sarah's house confirmed what she had suspected. The adult bobcat visited almost every night, stopping near the windows where Wilder could be seen. The experts at the Vermont Wildlife Conservation Center believed it was almost certainly Wilder's mother based on its behavior and the physical resemblance. A plan was drawn up. Wilder and his mother would be captured and taken to a safe area in the Green Mountain National Forest, where they could be reunited and released into the wild. The bobcat kitten would be fitted with a small tracking device, allowing researchers to monitor its development and ability to reintegrate. Everything was set. Tomorrow, the conservation team would return with special capture equipment and transport cages. Sarah had agreed to the plan, knowing it was best for Wilder, but it didn't lessen the sense of loss. On this final night, she had decided to let Wilder roam freely in the house, not confining it to the attic space she had prepared. One last night together, Sarah had made a special meal for Wilder, raw beef purchased from the best butcher in town. Afterward, they sat together on the couch. Wilder curled up beside her as she watched a wildlife documentary. A humorous coincidence, she thought, when a segment about bobcats appeared on the screen. Wilder seemed particularly interested, eyes glued to the screen. Exhausted from days of emotional turmoil, Sarah dozed off on the couch. Wilder still curled up beside her. She awoke hours later to a loud sound, almost a growl from Wilder, but stronger and more urgent than she had ever heard. Immediately, Sarah knew something was wrong. Wilder was standing at the back door, its entire body tense, for standing on end. Another sound, scratching from outside the door. Sarah reached for her phone, quickly snapped a photo of Wilder in this defensive posture, perhaps instinctively wanted to document the moment before slowly moving toward the door. "Wilder," she whispered, trying to soothe the tense wild animal. But the bobcat kitten didn't move from its position. The scratching came again, stronger this time. Sarah felt her heart pounding. It had to be the mother bobcat. She had come, with a trembling hand. Sarah reached for the hunting rifle she kept in a nearby cabinet, not to harm the animal, but only for self-defense if necessary. She slowly approached the back door and turned on the porch light. "I shouldn't be doing this," Sarah told herself. But something, perhaps curiosity or a sense that this was an important moment, compelled her to open the door. Eyes. That was the first thing she saw. Emeralds reflecting the porch light. The adult bobcat stood less than 10 feet away from her on the porch, soaked from the rain and emanating a wildness that Sarah had never directly confronted. It was larger than she had imagined, must have weighed at least 30 pounds, with lean muscles under its wet coat. None of the 3 creatures, Sarah, Wilder, or the mother bobcat, moved. Time seemed to stand still, and then, to Sarah's surprise, Wilder moved, not back behind her, but forward between her and the large bobcat. A small sound, almost like a meow, escaped from Wilder. The adult bobcat responded with a sound of its own, a raspy call that, even to Sarah's untrained ears, was recognizable as a call from mother to offspring. Sarah stood still, half frightened, half amazed, as Wilder cautiously moved closer to the large bobcat. In that moment, watching Wilder and its mother examine each other, Sarah understood a truth she had previously overlooked. Regardless of how attached Wilder had become to her, It was still a wild creature, a creature with a genetic code of thousands of years of hunting, with instincts she could never understand, and with a mother who had been searching for it. Slowly, Sarah backed into the house, her eyes never leaving the two bobcats. The mother bobcat observed her, its keen eyes alert, but there were no signs of aggression. Instead, there was curiosity, and perhaps Sarah was imagining it, an understanding. As Sarah closed and locked the door, she could still see the two bobcats through the glass door. Wilder, the creature that had slept beside her for so many nights, and its mother, the creature that had persistently searched for its offspring for so long. She grabbed her phone, and with hands still trembling, called Mike. "How long have they been there?" Mike asked, his voice sleepy but full of concern. The clock had struck 1 o'clock in the morning, but Sarah couldn't wait until dawn. "They're still there," Sarah whispered into the phone, her eyes not leaving the two bobcats on her porch. Wilder and his mother were still there, examining each other, occasionally exchanging small sounds that Sarah couldn't understand. "They're talking, I think. Don't interfere," Mike warned. "I'll call the conservation team. We'll be there as soon as possible." He paused. "Sarah, this is a rare opportunity. Mother found child. We can document this reunion. Learn from it." When Mike hung up, Sarah continued to observe. She grabbed her camera and took a few photos, trying not to distract the two wild animals. There was something sacred in this moment, a connection that she felt privileged to witness. 2 hours later, Mike arrived with Lauren and 2 other members of the conservation team. They quietly set up equipment in place, including a large cage specially designed to humanely capture bobcats. "We'll try to capture both," Mike explained. "Keep them together, attach a tracking device to Wilder, and release them at a different location in the national forest away from residential areas." Sarah nodded, her eyes still fixed on Wilder. The small creature had been with her for nearly a month, had become a part of her life, and now she was about to say goodbye. The capture process went more quickly and efficiently than expected. The mother bobcat entered the first cage, attracted by the bait of fresh meat. Wilder, perhaps by instinct and curiosity, quickly followed. Within 10 minutes, both bobcats had been safely placed in a larger cage for transport. By the time dawn broke, Mike's team was ready to leave. They had found a suitable location in the forest, an area with abundant food sources, and far from settlements. "Would you like to come along?" Mike asked gently. "To say goodbye." Sarah looked into the cage where Wilder and his mother sat side by side, bright eyes observing every movement. "Yes, Mo," she said, her voice with emotion. "I want to see them return to where they belong." The trip to the release site took an hour over bumpy roads, and finally a trail just wide enough for the off-road vehicle. Sarah sat in the back with the cage, talking softly to Wilder, occasionally touching the cage lightly, but careful not to touch the bobcat. She wanted to start the transition process of returning Wilder to being a wild creature, not a pet. When they arrived, the conservation team quickly set everything up. Lauren attached a small tracking device to Wilder, light enough not to hinder it, but strong enough to emit a signal for many months. The device would fall off as Wilder grew. "Ready?" Mike asked, his hand on the cage door. Sarah took a deep breath and nodded. She had prepared some goodbyes in her head, but now they seemed inadequate. How could she explain to a wild creature that it had changed her life, that in the short weeks they had spent together, Wilder had helped her rediscover joy after her divorce, helped her feel needed, loved, and connected? Instead, Sarah just smiled, tears rolling down her cheeks as Mike opened the cage door. The mother bobcat was the first to step out, careful and gentle. It stood near the cage, ears perked up alertly, assessing the surroundings. Wilder followed, initially hesitant, but then moved to its mother's side. The two bobcats stood there for a moment, looking back at the group of people, and Sarah could swear that Wilder looked directly at her. One last look, and then, in a blink of an eye, both disappeared into the bushes, the rustling leaves, the only sign of their presence. "Thank you," Sarah said, not turning to look at Mike for fear he would see her tears. "Thank you for everything." On the way back, Sarah felt empty, but also full. Empty because of losing Wilder, but full because she knew she had done the right thing. that Wilder was now where it belonged, with whom it belonged. When they reached her house, Mike and his team began dismantling the cameras and monitoring equipment they had installed. "I have this for you," Mike said, pulling out a small tablet from his bag. "It's connected to the tracking device. You can see Wilder's location in real time, and hear an app for your phone. Of course, the data will also go to our research center." But he paused, smiling. "I thought you want to know where Wilder is." Sarah held the tablet, looking at the screen where a small red was moving across the forest map. "Wilder." "Thank you," she said, her voice husky. "This means a lot." When Mike and his team left, Sarah stood alone in her wooden house. It was quieter, emptier. No more Wilder running around. No more sound of small claws on the wooden floor. She sat down with a hot cup of tea and opened her laptop. An idea was forming. A blog, perhaps, or even a book about her experience with Wilder, about what the Bobcat had taught her about wildlife and about herself. As Sarah began typing, the moment she shared with Wilder flashed through her mind. Finding in the rain, realized it was a bobcat, the nights it slept at the foot of her bed, and finally the moment it disappeared into the forest with its mother. Outside the window, the rain had stopped, and the first rays of sunlight broke through clouds. Sarah looked out toward the mountains, where Wilder was now running free, and felt a peace settling in. Perhaps in a few months, if the tracking device showed that Wilder was doing well, she would call Mike and ask if she could volunteer with the conservation team. It was time to create new connections. Sarah glanced down at the tablet where the red dot was still moving deep into the forest. She smiled through her tears. "Run free, Wilder," she whispered. "Run free."